Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about one of my most favorite games from the PS2 generation, a game called Goblin Commander Unleash the Horde. And this game is really special. It's one of those rare games that is not published or made by any of the big studios that we know of today. It was kind of in this era where we saw a lot of originality and people taking risks in their game development design. And it was a game that I don't know that sold all that much, but nonetheless, it was really good. Goblin Commander Unleash the Horde was one of my favorite games from the PS2 era. This was a console-only release. It released in 2003, and it's on the Gamecube, the PS2, and the Xbox. And this is a console real-time strategy game, and this did not have a PC release. It's kind of interesting on how a console RTS like this came out. Even back in 2003, real-time strategy was not as prevalent as when it was in the 90s. I really think that the 90s was kind of the peak for the RTS genre. We have seen a resurgence in that genre since then, but it's mostly been on PC. Goblin Commander was just so cool. They had a campaign that was built on different factions. So there was a faction of goblins that focused on rocks and a different set of goblins that focused on grass. And they all had a unique play style. And the control scheme for the time worked really well for console. You used your face buttons, so X, square, triangle, and circle, to command your goblin forces. And they really approached it from a simplistic point of view, kind of similar to Halo Wars. Halo Wars tried to take the complicated real-time strategy control scheme and simplified it to console. And Goblin Commander, from my understanding, is one of the first games that really succeeded in doing this. It's really easy to move your armies of goblins around. As the campaign progresses, you unlock more factions of goblins that you can use. So you can control different factions at once and kind of set up some strategy of which goblin factions are going to go where on the map. And it worked out really well. And I think going with a simplified point of view in this game really paid off and allowed it to be accepted by a lot of people. And it didn't really have a steep learning curve. The game did a really good job of introducing you on how the factions work, how the buildings work, how you train units, how you upgrade units, and how you acquire resources. And it was unique. And nothing up until that time really did what Goblin Commander did. And I think that's why I like it so much. I thought the campaign was fairly long too. If last time I played it, which is a long time ago now, but I think it took me well over 10 hours or even 12 hours to beat this campaign. And I found the story enjoyable. It's kind of before games where everyone had a voiced line, so a lot of it is text-based. But you can still kind of follow along and get an understanding of, the point of this story. It's not a game that is gameplay first and story second. I actually thought the story was quite well received, in my opinion. I also really enjoyed Goblin Commander's approach to both resource gathering and training your units. Usually the buildings in Goblin Commander were already at a preset location, but the way you gather resources, usually by destroying stuff, so knocking down trees, blowing up a pile of rocks, those sorts of things. You'll acquire gold coins, and you can spend those coins to train or upgrade your units. And I really love the user interface when you enter a building to build these units. The units that you can't build, they're kind of behind a cage, so it automatically will tell you that you can't train those sorts of units. And I thought it was really neat too when you get upgrades for your units, they visually change. You could visually see the upgrade being applied to the unit. And, that may not sound like a big deal right now in 2021, but back in 2003, that was a huge deal when you did some sort of upgrade and your unit visually changed. You could see that upgrade, whether it's, a larger bow and arrow for the Hellfire faction or a bigger slingshot for the Stone Crusher faction. You could see that happen, and it was really, really neat. Goblin Commander also kind of introduced this thing. I think they're called soul nodes. It's almost identical to how power nodes are used in Halo Wars 2. It's kind of a node that you can capture, and as long as you kind of maintain line of sight or you control that node, you'll continuously get in a supply of resources. And I thought that was really neat. It kind of gives some strategy. You know, maybe your opponent's units will try and take that from you. You either need to turn your squad around or head back to defend it. That was kind of interesting, and I really like that approach, other than the traditional way that we've been used to getting resources in other strategy games, which is either you make resource gathering units or some sort of building that gathers resources for you. This game just really simplified it, and that's what made it such an enjoyment. Also, the super units in Goblin Commander were so cool. They were usually this absolutely massive unit that not only could you command just like you could with your faction, but you could actually manually take control of these. If memory serves me right, it's like the triangle button when you hover over the super unit, and then instead of pointing and clicking and commanding the unit to move in that direction, you actually use the analog sticks, and it almost turns into like a third-person game where you move around the super unit, and then you can command and control the attacks. So the super unit for the Stone Crusher faction, for example, had like this really huge giant, and you can move him around. He had different attacks, like kind of stomping and swinging his big axe or his club, whatever he was holding. But he also had this kind of absorbing technique where you hit the square button and he would swipe down and try and grab a opposing, or I even think a friendly goblin. It didn't matter who it was that was in your way. He would grab it and then he would actually eat it, and then he would restore health. And that was just so cool that you could kind of have some personality and individually command the super units. I thought that was just so neat. And they even went so far as to think about, well, what about your original goblins? What happens to them? Well, what you could do is you could have them kind of follow the super unit. So you could control all of your goblins by manually controlling the super unit. That was so cool. And each faction had their own version of a super unit, and they were each original to their own, but the Stone Crusher one was my favorite because he could eat the opponents. I thought that was awesome. Unfortunately, there was never a sequel announced for Goblin Commander Unleash the Horde. The publisher who made this game ran into some financial trouble, and that's quite common actually with a lot of the game developers in the PS2, Xbox era. I think it really was a time of kind of consolidation and acquisition within the gaming industry. I mean, you even saw like publishers that aren't even around anymore, like Midway, for example, was putting out a lot of games on the PS2. And the publisher of Goblin Commander was kind of among that group where they kind of put out not AAA games, but I guess either AA or single A games, kind of the B tier games that weren't like blockbuster must own, but still really good games that would kind of complement your library. And I think Goblin Commander is one of those games. And I don't know who owns the IP anymore. I went searching for this online. I couldn't really get an understanding of who owns the IP. Someone surely owns it. It's probably just dormant somewhere. So maybe someone could acquire that IP and either make a remake or a re-release of some sort. I really do think that this game needs to be re-released again. I think it's good enough to where, just putting a slight visual upgrade would be fine, or allowing it to go up to 1080p. Not necessarily a remaster, but just a port to the new consoles or even PC, put it on GOG, I think would be really great. But, that's just my opinion. Who knows if that'll ever happen? There was no sequel ever announced for this game. So, stranger things have happened in the gaming industry. So I wouldn't hold out on there being a sequel or anything. I think that's extremely unlikely. But who knows what the future may hold. Funny enough, the first time I played this game, I accidentally rented it at Blockbuster thinking that it was a different game. I was looking for War of the Monsters, another classic PS2 game I'll make a video on the channel. But I thought Goblin Commander was that. And when I put the game in, I'm like, this is definitely not what I intended on renting this evening. But nonetheless, I played it, and I loved it so much, I went out and bought my own copy, which I still own to this day. That copy's, almost 20 years old now. I think I'm getting old. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on Goblin Commander. Did you ever play this classic, not well-received, but well-beloved game? I'd love to know if you've ever experienced this game in the comments down below. And, maybe one of these days I'll fire it up and stream it or something. Who knows? Who knows? All right, that does it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you, James.